Good evening all and welcome. Tonight I have some stories from the deep woods. It's going to be Nature Week this week. We're going to have a bunch of stories about cryptids and, stuff happening outside. It's going to be a full week of videos being launched every single day, so please tune in daily to watch them. I'm going to have something at the end of the video regarding the story video, so if you want to listen to that, stick to the end. But for now, get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I was living in a part of Texas with a dense forest. My friend and I were in middle school and enjoyed exploring at night. We learned that the drainage pipe on the side of the road was big enough for us to crouch through, so we hopped in and started walking, leaving markers as our guide to return. After 30 minutes to an hour of walking, we popped out a manhole that landed us in the middle of nowhere, deep in the woods. We kept walking until we came across an abandoned 2-story cabin. No road leading up to it, no means of accessing the cabin by vehicle. What could be argued as the front lawn was littered with half-buried toys, all of them looking pretty old in design. Plenty of porcelain dolls were buried in that yard. The windows were too dirty to see inside of, so we broke a window with a rock to get in. What could have been furniture at one point had rotted away so that only the iron frames remained. The floor of the cabin was completely covered in old, empty oil cans, the kinds you see in 50s cartoons. We couldn't go upstairs because the stairway had collapsed from rot, so we left and started making our way to the manhole we came from. As we were walking away, I took a look back to the cabin. In a window of one of the second-story rooms, I swear to God, I saw a child staring back at me. He looked to be about 8 to 10 and had short, straight black hair. I'm convinced that on that day, I saw a ghost. My name is Chad. I have recently just gotten through a very rough patch in my life. I had lost my job due to budget cuts, and had found out that my girlfriend of 3 years had been cheating on me. I spent about a month down in the dumps, doing the whole depression bit, until I decided to make a big change in my life. You see, for my entire life I've lived in Ohio, but I have friends all over the US thanks to the internet. One of my closest friends, called Sam, lives out in southeastern Montana, outside of the city of Billings, close to the Crow Reservation. I had told him all about my issues, and he said word for word, "Well, man, I've got a guest house on the farm that's empty. I need a hand on the farm anyway. You come out here, that guest house and a job on the farm are as good as yours." Before I knew it, I was in Sam's town. I pulled up to Sam's ranch and he greeted me. He spent some time playing with my dog, who was more than happy to finally be out of the truck. He told me to follow him to the guest house, so I did. I settled in for the night and passed out. Fast forward a week, I had been helping Sam out on the farm, and one Friday night he says he's got a special treat planned for me. We're going to go to my uncle's cabin in the mountains in the western part of the state, get absolutely wrecked, and shoot some elk. Consider it your welcoming party. I was hyped. I hadn't been hunting in a long time, and the opportunity to harvest an elk was something that excited me. Plus, I was a functioning alcoholic at this point, and I wasn't going to turn down free booze. We pile into my Chevy Blazer, with 4 rifles, 2 shotguns, and 4 pistols between the two of us, and an arseload of ammo. We stopped at the gas station to stock up on cigarettes, chewing tobacco, and of course, Coors Light, the cowboy beer of choice. We still had to drive 2 more hours to reach the cabin, and hike another hour after that. But Sam is like a brother to me, so we passed the time pleasantly enough talking about politics and stuff. When we arrived at the cabin just before sunset, we unpacked, had some beers, and went to turn in for the night. For context, the way this cabin was set up was that it had 3 rooms, a big living room with a fireplace, a small bedroom on each side, and a small wood-burning stove in the back. Outside is a shed with a generator inside it, and an outhouse. We woke up in the morning and suited up to find elk to harvest. We followed a big game trail and time flew. probably because the scenery was completely new to me and it was so breathtaking. We reached a clearing, and I was just following Sam. I heard him mutter, "The hell?" I looked in his direction to see what it was he was talking about. We saw a dead buck elk on the ground, which had been gutted, and its organs had been pulled out in a methodical fashion. No meat had been harvested, and the antlers and pelt were all left in place. That wasn't the strangest part. It was lying in the middle of a strange sigil on the ground. In the middle of the sigil was a pentagram, but it had what appeared to be a crescent moon on each side, and it looked like it was made from ash. I didn't recognize the symbol at first, and assumed it was just some edgy 8th grader or something like that. Sam knelt down and picked something up off the ground. It was a knife. It looked like it was made of obsidian with a bone handle. He wrapped it in a scarf and put it inside his backpack, while I was ranting about those damn edgy kids LARPing as Satanists. Sam tells me to calm down so that we can continue our hunt. To cut to the chase, we were unsuccessful in our hunt, so we turned in and headed back to the cabin to get wasted. I was about 2 Coors Light deep when I watched Sam jet up from the recliner he was sitting in. He walks towards one of the windows with a quickness. "Yo, there's someone outside. Grab a few guns." I shot up and began to pray St. Michael's prayer while I walked over to the cabinet with our guns. I grabbed my lever-action rifle, pistols, Sam's semi-auto shotgun, and his pistols. We both slipped our boots on. We could both hear some kind of chanting outside. We shouldered our guns and Sam flipped on the outside light and opened the door. We stuck together and could hear the chanting clearly, but couldn't make out what was being said. It sounded like it was coming from a variety of directions. I fired a round into the ground and demanded to know who was out there. Sam yelled out that it was private property, and if they didn't clear out, they would be shot. I could see vague shapes of people moving in the tree line. I couldn't count how many, but it was more than just a few. I hear a loud banging behind me. Sam had fired off a round from his shotgun. By this point, any buzz we had from the alcohol was gone. The chanting was becoming louder and louder, but harder to understand. The voices were clearly feminine, though. I shot off 3 rounds in the direction of the shapes, not really interested in hitting anything. Sam says he thinks it would be a good idea to leave, and I agree with him, so we inch back to the cabin door. He tells me to wait at the door while he packs up the essentials. By essentials, he meant our portable floodlights and the rest of our guns, and the MREs we had packed. We locked the cabin and held his floodlight as we began to walk down the trail to where the truck was parked. The hike took us an hour on the way up, but seemed much longer. We could still hear the chanting, and it seemed to be following us. But we couldn't hear nor see anyone doing the following. We both prayed St. Michael's prayer over and over. When we finally reached the truck, we threw our stuff in and sped out of there. We could see a bright glow coming from the direction of the cabin as we drove off. We hauled ass back into town, got to the farm, and piled up into the guest house I was living in. We didn't sleep, and clutched our guns and Bibles tight, but nothing else happened. 2 weeks later, Sam's uncle called him and asked him what happened in the cabin. Sam was confused, and his uncle told him that it had been burnt down, and that the debris had been rearranged into the same symbol we found in the clearing, with 3 dead buck elk laying in the center. We were terrified, and never returned. I still work on the farm, and am living in the guest house, and Sam and I are closer than ever. Sam also still has the knife he found in the clearing. But one thing's for certain, we will never be returning. Me and my dad were looking for mushrooms when I was about 15. I'm 21 now, and we found a trash bag that smelled really bad. It was pretty deep in the woods, and sometimes it's not uncommon for people to throw out dogs and stuff they've killed in this area, because that's the culture, unfortunately. But they probably wouldn't go that deep into the woods for something like this. I reached down and felt it, and I swear I felt a human elbow. It was squishy and not hairy like an animal. My dad forced me to stop touching it and told me not to tell anyone. I still regret that and wish I remembered where it was so that I could go back and check. This was in a small town, for context, in West Virginia, and only about an hour away from the Summer Wells case, and me and another friend were almost kidnapped as children. So yeah, think what you will about the area. This story is one told to me from my Uncle Rick. Out of every story I've heard from any other individual when sharing scary stories, this one is by far the scariest. It was shared to me in 2019, right before the corona outbreak, but happened to my uncle when he was 26 or so, in the late 80s. Now, my uncle has served in the armed forces and has had a number of largely traumatic experiences during his life. However, this one is still the one that haunts him the most. Let's get to it. During the late 80s, Uncle Rick had just had a son with his longtime wife that he's still married to this day, Aunt Bart. Uncle Rick had always lived near the woods, and they had this one cabin way in the woods that they would let visitors or friends and family rent out on vacation. My uncle always kept the cabin and the area around it neat, and would always have him and his friends cut the grass, the bushes, sometimes even cutting the trees around it. It was one summer day, sometime in the beginning of summer, so about the middle of May, I think. He said he and his close friends that he had met in the service had come back from a hike that they would always take once a week, where they would walk and talk mostly about their old-time experiences, future plans, and other stuff that would be considered deep. The way they would walk would be going past the cabin. While going past on this particular day, my uncle remembered glancing over to the cabin and getting a view of the grass. Sheesh, I forgot it's been about 2 weeks since the last time I mowed it. My uncle had a habit of keeping the outyard of his house and the cabin orderly in case of visitors, and just always being taught by my grandparents on how to keep things tidy. After making the comment about the grass, his friend Ed laughed, and they both agreed that they would cut the grass quickly to get it over and done with. Now, my uncle decided to do the back while Ed did the front. When my uncle was done, he could hear something in the distance. He put away his lawnmower, and as he was approaching Ed, heard something. It sounded like a loud whooping that would be really loud and then get really quiet, over and over again. This was freaking him out. He was approaching Ed to see if he could hear it, when he saw something. It looked like a white line. It was just straight that started to widen, and as it did, the whooping sound grew louder. It was starting to freak him out. It was so bright that his eyes were going a bit fuzzy. When then he saw a rabbit-like figure, 7 feet tall, standing on its hind legs, sort of humanoid-like, come out of this light. That was the last thing he remembered seeing until he blacked out. He woke up in a hospital bed with the worst stinging pain he had ever experienced in both his eyes for about 5 minutes. The doctors heard him yelling and approached him. They asked him what happened. All that he could remember was the bunny figure. But when they asked him, and family too, he wouldn't come out with the truth. All he said was that the lawnmower had blown up, despite the fact he hadn't a cut or bruise on him. He was very confused, and after a lot of back and forth, it was revealed to him that he had been asleep for 3 days. In truth, everyone there had assumed that Ed had done something to Rick, but when asked, he declined and said that he had nothing to do with it. As the days went by, Rick wouldn't tell everyone what properly happened. When we asked from Ed's perspective, he said that he had just blacked out and that he called the paramedics and that's why he was there. As time went on, the truth was revealed. Ed said that he too heard the whooping sound and thought it was just something in his eardrums. Then he saw a light and the line getting smaller and smaller and saw that Uncle Rick was unconscious and not moving, and he tried to shake him with no response. He was still alive. He checked for the pulse, and after calling the paramedics and waiting for their arrival, he didn't really want to leave the back door. After this experience, my Uncle Rick became a changed man. He is no longer religious, but has opened his belief to way more things. He started studying more of the world and himself, and at age 60 spent his life in nature and traveling the world, looking for lots of other things about life. You can say that this strange experience of the weird creature, whatever it may be, changed him. I live in south central Pennsylvania, Appalachia, deep in the sticks. I work night shift, so on my days off I tend to stay up at night. I was binging on Netflix and just relaxing at about 2 or 3 in the morning when I hear a knock on an exterior wall of my single-wide trailer. About midway down the trailer, it's just one hard knock, more like a thump. Instantly, the hair on my neck goes on end. I felt the thump. I paused my show and listened for a few minutes, but there's nothing and I shrug it off. I go back to watching my show and hear another one on the other side of the trailer. I'm a little confused this time. I draw my handgun and go to the door. As I'm reaching for the handle, I get a solid urge to not open the door, so I don't. I sit down on the couch and listen. And I'm thoroughly bugged. Nothing else happens for the rest of the night. The next night, the same thing. I'm watching Netflix and I hear a lot of shuffling in the yard. I draw my Glock and step out on the deck. I shine the pistol-mounted light off the deck. The house is surrounded by deer, not abnormal for where I'm at. All the deer stare at me, bounding away except one. It's bigger, the proportions were off, it just kind of stood outside where my light reaches. I've got alarm bells going off in my head and I point the Glock at it and it just stares, and then begins walking away at an angle. Walking all jerky, not bounding. While it's walking, it's still staring at me with both eyes. Kind of crazy angle to have its head turned considering the way it's walking. I watch it walk into the woods and go back inside. Next night I'm at work. I come home and my girlfriend says, "Hey, can you get a handgun out the safe and load it and put it in the bedroom closet?" "Sure, why?" Apparently she was breastfeeding my newborn. She said she heard one loud knock on the door and it gave her the creeps. The kid freaked out too, and they didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I didn't tell her about the knocks at night I've experienced. I'm pretty sure the deer thing was a not deer. I've seen one before on a country road. This was years ago, around 11 o'clock at night. I was driving and saw something at human height on the road with photoluminescent eyes looking at me and walk into the woods, and it gave me the creeps. I'm wondering about the knocking on my trailer walls. What the hell am I dealing with? Any help would be appreciated. I used to like exploring in the woods a lot. This one time I was exploring in the woods with my first girlfriend. We were at the bottom of a deep ravine when we found what looked like a tea party. There was a small pink round table, and the chairs were set up with teacups on little saucers. It was creepy as hell. We thought it was cool. We looked around the area, and on the ground beside the tea party setup was a stuffed animal as well as a children's backpack, My Little Pony. We didn't look inside it, as it was very creepy, and left. I did pick up the backpack before I noticed the initial CB written on it. That night, without my girlfriend there, I got curious and did some research. It turns out there was a little girl that had gone missing with the initial CB about a year prior. Her body had been found in another part of the province, though, but I still to this day can't help but believe that we found the site of something horrific. I don't remember if the killer was ever caught, but he must have if I never reported it. I have a summer home in Loggia, Italy. The cabin is located in a camping site in the middle of the woods, and I used to go there frequently when I was around 8. Now in the night, between 11 and 4 a.m., it's prohibited to leave your cabin because of the hogs that roam around the camp in search for food while no one's outside. One night though, I got out after puking my soul out to take some fresh air and get the ability to think clearly. It was around 2:27 in the morning. All the lights were out. Not a single light bulb was illuminated, and I couldn't see much except a tall figure wiggling in my direction. It was windy that night, so I thought it was a tree just moving. I didn't think about it twice and got off the porch to get closer to it. After a few seconds, a pair of eyes refracted from an unknown light source, and they looked directly at me. I felt my soul leaving my body. Without letting my brain process what the hell was going on, I started running inside the cabin and closed the door and windows, as well as the curtains. I couldn't sleep that night. I peeked out of the windows a few more times to see if the thing was still there, but no luck. It wasn't. The next day, the camp's dog mascot, Mustard, was found dead in the construction site for the renovation of the pool. The camp owners blamed it on a camper who lived nearby. In the afternoon that same day, I had a mental breakdown, and my grandparents had to take me home. I'm 19 now and still go there during the summer breaks, but not as much as I used to before. I'm still terrified of the thing that keeps appearing in my dreams to this day. Maybe an explanation to the event is that Mustard climbed onto the tree while escaping a hog. But what I don't understand is who took the corpse to the pool, and even if a hog pushed her all the way in, there's something like 400 meters between my cabin and the pool. Wouldn't it try and eat it? Usually the hogs get down to camp in search of food, and there are a lot of hogs, 25 to 40 per night usually. Which begs the question, why would none of them go near the corpse? In the end, Mustard was buried under the bed of a river that drains during the summer. What the hell did I see that night? I went hunting 2 years ago with my dad, and his best friend, my uncle. My dad and my uncle have been hunting for 35 years. Moose mostly. Sometimes bison or elk or caribou, if moose didn't work out that year. So usually, they buy a moose tag each, and someone gets an elk tag or whatever just in case. And every time, though they have never needed it, they've each brought a bear tag. One for black and one for grizzly. Where we hunt, you are a full day's travel by boat before you see civilization, sometimes 2 days. The only communication is by satellite phone, which only works sometimes. Sometimes, stuff happens out there, and you have to be prepared. Now sure, you can hopefully explain to the officials later that you had to kill the animal you had no tag for in self-defense, and hopefully they'd believe you. But if you just buy a tag, you know you're safe legally to take whatever measures necessary for protection. But like I've said, we've never needed those tags. Not in 3.5 decades of being out there, despite all their numerous bear encounters. Dad knows an outfitter who has a small plywood shack out here down by the river, about 15 by 15 square feet. He warns us that a buddy of his recently used the shack and had bear trouble, so he went out to line the outside with corrugated tin. We know our bear's safety, and it's bear country all over, so we decide to stay. On the first night there are no problems. However, we find fresh bear feces on site, rifles up and eyes open, chat loud all night, smash big pieces of tin together so that the ear-splitting, snapping booms echo off into the hills. The next day we're up and early out hunting, not much luck, but we make some friends on the river. They camped upstream by a slough that we usually stop the boats at and drift and chat for a bit. Turns out one of them knows the outfitter whose cabin we're in, and he fills us in on a few things. Someone recently used it, had bear trouble, then decided to illegally bait the bear with hot dogs every night for a week in order to lure it to camp, so that he could shoot it. Only he never committed, he just fed the bear. He made noise and stink and threatening actions, then fed the bear treats, actively teaching it that these things are safe and will result in food. Oh dear. We do some more traveling upstream and see nothing and return to camp. Trail into camp from the river, marked by some spare jerry cans we have full of fuel. One of them has been dragged into the middle of a trail and bitten in 2 places and punctured several times and is still leaking. Rifles up. Get into camp, the grub stash got broken into. Must have not locked it up right, or the culprit knew what they were doing from experience. The camp is a mess, half the food is gone, some emptied and torn up plastic bags have been cached into a patch of moss behind the shack, and there's debris everywhere. There's a bear in the camp. I'm ahead of my dad and uncle, so I call it out as soon as I see the mess. There's still ice stuck to some of the bags that had frozen food in it. This just happened. I know there's a bear here. He's likely watching or listening to me right now as I'm scanning the area, unable to see a damn thing. We clean up, lock up tighter, store stuff in the boat, and start pissing everywhere, making more noise, shouting, hollering, smashing tin and using the foghorn to scare him away. I look around more to try and find out what exactly we're dealing with. The ground in the camp is all moss and sticks, but if it bit the gas cans at the trailhead, then it may have come down the beach where there was sand. We found the tracks I was looking for, but couldn't decide what they were from. Claws out suggest grizzlies, but they were very small prints, and only clear tracks were going up a steep incline, so it could have been a black trying to grip the sand. That night, it's outside the shack. We hear it walking around. We hear it sniffing the walls from the outside. There's a small porch off the front of the shack. We hear it walking around and we shout to no avail. This is where it sinks in that we are in trouble with this bear. It has absolutely no fear of us, none at all. It doesn't care about the noise. It doesn't care that there are several of us, and it doesn't care that the camp smells like our piss and smoke. It has learned that these things are not threats. It has learned that this place has food, and these sounds and behaviors are a signal that more food has been brought here and has become available. It's October in the Arctic. This boy is ready for a few big final meals before finding a den for the winter, and he isn't leaving. All night the bear circles the shack. Uncle tries to sleep but can hear the bear sniffling his head from 2 inches away through the plywood and tin. Dad sleeps. Bear action increases and becomes more daring as the night goes on. Uncle and I try to sleep as well, but it's light and on and off. In the wee hours of the morning, the bear becomes more aggressive, chuffing, clapping his teeth, pacing around the shack, pacing the porch, sniffing the door, and sometimes standing and peering in the windows. It's dark. All we can see is a dark shape out there in the shadows. Uncle and I agree to let Dad sleep as much as possible now. He's our best shooter, and we want him to be well rested for the inevitable showdown that's coming, like some horrible Wild West movie. Finally, it's time to begin. The bear is ready. It starts trying to open the door. The door only has a wire and 2 nails holding it shut. Skookum hardware to be sure, but nonetheless wanting. It's dark inside the shack, so every time the bear finds an edge to grip onto with its teeth and tries to pull the door open, the wood flexes and lets in a flash of white morning light around the doorframe. I'll never forget that. It's pulling a few times, losing its grip, getting a better grip, then pulling again. Flash, 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 pause, flash, 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 trying to open the door and get to us or our food or whatever. Dad is up by now, of course, miffed about missing all the evening excitement, but ready to take care of this. We have a quick exchange between the 3 of us, in which we all quickly agree with great resignation and disappointment that we need to take this animal's life. We have never killed a bear, we've never wanted to, we love bears. They're such beautiful and powerful animals. To see a big, healthy bear, all fat, with a shiny coat, roaming in its natural habitat, it's a sign that the entire ecosystem and food chain leading up to it are healthy. They're a symbol of a healthy ecosystem and a truly incredible piece of nature. But this one's been ruined. It's been fed. There's no curing this, there's no fixing it, and there's no leaving this cabin with that thing at our door. I stand at one tiny plexiglass window, Uncle on the other side, and Dad standing by the door with his rifle loaded and ready. There's no tin on the door, so he considers shooting through it. The bear hears him and has dropped back to all fours and is now sniffling the base of the door. I'm helping Dad line up the shot to its head. Suddenly it swings its head up and walks a few feet over to my window. It stands, and I find myself staring face to face with a big fat black bear, with small brown eyes and a very small pupil staring back at me, inches away with nothing but plexi between us. I'm staring into this thing's eyes and imagining all things going wrong. If it hurt me or my father or even my uncle, my family would be devastated, and for the first time in my life I feel the fight or flight response, and I feel rage. The audacity of this animal to not leave when we goddamn told it to. How dare you? I bare my teeth and snarl and jerk towards it, suddenly screaming at it, slamming my hands against the window frame to make a big jarring motion and noise. It didn't even flinch, not a blink, just staring deadpan. This guy's broken. He drops back down and sniffs the door, sniffs around where he left scraps the day before that we'd cleaned up, moving a foot away, a few more feet, just over the woodpile now. Dad steps out onto the porch in all his glory, wearing nothing but his boxers, his boots, and his glasses. He raises the rifle and shoots, hitting it in what must have been the lungs. The bear drops immediately. Immediately it tries to stand again. It manages to stand its back legs up, but the front of its body and its face is still laying on the ground and it's trying to drag itself upwards. Second shot, down. Use a wide circle to get in close behind the head and away from the paws, and the final shot enters its skull through the back. We tag it, then sit down for a bit to make some coffee and process the events before processing the bear. We will have to take the skull and fur back to the CO's to check over, but we don't want to eat bear due to the parasites. It's legal to leave the body, and we kind of have to, but it feels horrible, wasteful and dirty, like we're taking trophies off this thing that should have never ended up like this. I can't remember if I had any tears over it that day, but I certainly felt like it, and probably did later on once the adrenaline had worn off. The whole thing was just sad and unavoidable. Dad and Uncle and I talked about how this was all due to human activity in the first place, trying to reassure ourselves that we can't be held responsible for the actions of others. We can only try to be responsible for ourselves. We ended up dragging the bear a few 100 feet back into the shack. We won't be staying there for more than 2 more days, and wolves are known to frequent the area, so we felt confident that we'd be off everyone's menu until it was time to break camp. Wolves defending an easy meal means free security in the area, and as long as we don't bother each other, we're happy a few 100 meters away from each other. The rest of the trip goes fine. We get our moose, uneventful aside from that. An official comes via boat launch to check our tag, and we tell him the whole story about the bear. Having a tag negates the need for that, but considering the circumstances and our own sense of shame in the involvement, we wanted to make sure we got everything out in the open. They need to track stuff like problem bears and human behavior that creates it, and test the skull for various diseases to ensure the behavior isn't due to something else that may be affecting the population. They reassured us that we did everything right in the terrible circumstances we found ourselves in, and let us know where to turn in the hide and skull, and even returning the hide to us later. We had it tanned. We weren't sure how else to treasure what was left of that bear, and we wanted to keep the memory of the risks, the dangers and the responsibilities we face when we are out there. But that behavior. Total confidence around humans, like it's so unnatural. It almost didn't feel like a real bear. But not maybe it's rabid, in a way that it just knows. It knows it can do it and get away with it. It was Easter Day, and me and my family and a few friends went into the woods to relax and walk for a bit. It's common to find pretty big abandoned houses or buildings in the woods here in Italy, so when we passed this really big house, my little brother wanted to see it on all sides, so we did. When we got closer, we noticed a garden circled by a wall and an old lady looking at us from behind it. At that point, we thought simply that the house was abandoned, but at the moment we got closer to the gate of the garden and could see behind the wall, I noticed that the wall was really tall for someone to look above it, and there wasn't anything that could help someone climb onto the wall. But the strangest thing, the lady wasn't there anymore, but there was more strange details. The house actually looked abandoned, and the windows were broken and the rooms were empty. At one point we swore we heard dogs barking from the garden. We went to the gate again to check and there were no dogs. I grew up in a small mountain town in Canada. It was about 7. It was winter. My dad and I were to meet friends at the lake and play some hockey. We took an ATV down the trail to the lake that was about 5 kilometers away. It snowed, and there was a lot of fresh powder on the trail. My dad was driving, and I was looking around in the woods, about 15 feet off the trail, when I saw a man standing there. I screamed for my dad to stop. He asked what was up, and he looked and saw him. There were no footprints or anything indicated how he made it into the forest. We were so perplexed. My dad hurried to the lake and couldn't believe what he'd seen. Me, however, I've seen the man a few times before in our local shopping center. He was always having tea every time I saw him. He was in his 70s, hair slightly balded on top with a comb over to the left. He wore old faded Levi's and an old 80s multicolored ski jacket and had white sneakers on, and these old thick glasses that were kind of colored. It's been 21 years since that day, and I've always wondered about the man in the woods. So does my dad. I was in the woods of Wisconsin about 3 years ago with my friends. We had the intent to go mess around and smoke weed. We had a large flashlight and a Swiss Army knife. We were talking about ghost stories and local legends. That's when we heard twigs snapping behind us. We thought it was us at first, so we ignored it. But then we heard it was in front of us, shortly after 5 minutes or so, and we started to get uncomfortable. I told a few jokes to lighten the mood, and it worked. About 10 minutes later, we sit down and take a rest. We continued telling jokes, but shortly after we smelled this awful stench. It was so bad, my friend actually puked. We thought we had sat by a decaying animal or something, so we continued to walk. After about 20 minutes, I see a man, about 5'6". He looks really dirty. He was looking at the floor. My friends and I were kind of freaked out. My friend James threw a stick over to him and the guy turned and dove for the stick. We were terrified and booked it out the woods, dropping the flashlight in the process. Who the hell was that man? We never returned to the woods. Not even to this day. When I was in college, my buddies and I went camping in the Cascade Mountains. It was very late because we were lost. It had become pitch black outside as we were trying to find our campsite. We turned down a road that was paved, so it seemed fine. We came upon a man wearing a face shield wielding a chainsaw. He was wearing dirty pants and a white tank top. He had 2 children with him wearing dirty dresses and holding dolls. They waved gleefully at us. Probably not to seem like a threat, but it actually made us feel worse. Could they have been filming some kind of homemade horror project? Or was there a much darker and sinister intention at work? When my sister and I were quite young, we lived in the country near railroad tracks, and we would often go on long walks on the tracks, play in the woods, with not much going on in the 80s. On one of our walks, we were about a mile from our house, and swear we saw what I now know as a skinwalker on the edge of the woods ahead of us. It was human-like, but more grey and seemingly had a red flash to it. We didn't have a name for it back then, but we definitely both felt in danger and ran home very fast. Later, we both did a cross-country run for school, and on a practice run, we approached the biggest moose we'd ever seen. And another time we had to run home before a tornado hit 2 miles north from our house. You really never know what you're going to find in the woods of northern Wisconsin. Hey guys, thank you so much for listening. I'm sorry about the sorry video. I hope that you found it funny. I know a lot of you were like, le gasp. But yeah, it was to let you know about the reduced ads that I'm going to try and doing going forward. So I hope that it's received well by all of you. I know it's a new ad structure, but yeah, it's just to let you know, and also to try and boost the channel a little bit, let you know about this cool week that I thought would be fun. Just nature-themed stories and cryptids for the week. Should be good. I'd like to thank, as always, my members and patrons, and just everyone that supports me, anyone who watches to the end of the videos. You guys really mean the world to me. Thank you so much for your continued support.
It really means a hell of a lot. And I will hopefully see you tomorrow at the same time, so stay awesome. I'll see you in the next one.